Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here at One Shot. Today I'm going to be talking about a proposal for bringing blockchain to mainstream users. First, some background about myself. My name is Eric Lee. I was one of the co-founders of LinkedIn, one of the world's most successful professional networks. LinkedIn is a collaborative platform that most of you know. Currently, we're working on a blockchain project called Hub, and we're based mainly in Silicon Valley. So I thought I would take a minute to talk about my experience from LinkedIn and how it led me to the blockchain world. LinkedIn has so far collected about 500 million users. It started in 2002 and is currently part of Microsoft when the company was acquired back in 2014. So LinkedIn was one of the most successful professional networks in the world. And 15 to 16 years later, a lot of users benefit from the platform. Besides an advertising model, it has a business model around recruiting and jobs, helping recruiters and companies to hire job seekers and provide economic value. But in those 15 to 16 years, the internet has definitely changed, and we've learned a lot about the opportunities as well as the limitations of social networks and professional networks. And one of the problems that we saw at LinkedIn was that while there's a lot of information, professional profiles, and so forth on the platform, a lot of it is falsified because information is entered in by users, and sometimes they exaggerate about their academic record or their professional record. And that is a problem for companies when they make hiring decisions, so forth, and they're relying on that information to be accurate to make important decisions to bring people onto their team. So what I thought I'd do first is to just talk about blockchain in the context of some of the technological revolutions that have happened over the last few decades. So my first example goes back to the beginning times of computers. Back in the 1940s, computers would occupy really large rooms and be able to only calculate maybe 1,000 instructions per second. So very similar to the performance characteristics of blockchain today. You fast forward to 2018, and all of us have a smartphone in our pockets that's about 40 million times more powerful than the earliest computers. The last technological revolution was really the internet, which began decades earlier than 1993, but in terms of the popular culture, we knew it back since 1993 with the introduction of the web browser and the World Wide Web. And then fast forward to this year, you have services and apps like WeChat that really provide amazing amounts of applications and functionality and is the portal and the gateway to the technology world for billions of users. And so blockchain itself really came onto the popular scene back in 2017, even though the first creation of blockchain was started back in 1991. And so we're at the beginning of this new revolution. And so in a few years' time, what is going to happen? In many ways, we're all participating in the development of blockchain. And so it's in that context that I'm discussing an idea for how we can bring blockchain to the mainstream. So I want to introduce you first to this person, Don Tapscott, who is a well-known speaker. And several years ago, he was speaking at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. And he gave what I believe was the best understanding of what blockchain is. And he talked about how we're moving from currently what is the Internet of Information to what we will be having, which is an Internet of Value. And the best way to understand the difference between the Internet of Information and Internet of Value is to say that information is about content, but that content might be true and it might be also false. And so it's very hard sometimes to make reliable decisions on it. And what is value? Well, it's a simple concept, but it's also difficult to explain. And value is simply those things that we hold valuable. So money is things that we hold valuable. Things in the real world, like real estate, are also things that we hold valuable. And what the blockchain lets us do is to record items of value and to be able to keep that in a digital format and also to transfer it to others in a secure way. And there are so many instances of that in the real world that blockchain is going to be able to represent, that it really represents a big jump from where we are today. And that's really one of the strengths of blockchain. So you probably know about a lot of projects in blockchain that have to be involved with improving the fundamental technology of blockchain. Problems like performance, TPS, cost of running blockchain, different kinds of consensus algorithms, those kinds of things. And those are all important things that as an industry, the blockchain industry needs to solve to realize the vision for blockchain. But I would argue that we really need to start looking at applications, because one of the challenges with cryptocurrency today is that it's hard to find underlying intrinsic value that is tied to these cryptocurrencies. So with the example, or with the exception of a couple of use cases that have been successful, things like Bitcoin and ICOs, there aren't really other applications that have really mattered to a lot of people. And then beyond that, we have to get away from just serving crypto enthusiasts, people who are interested in the technology for itself. Because if you look at the number of wallets that might be in existence today, maybe there are 30 million, but that's still a very small percentage of the billions of people that exist out there today. So the faster that we can move towards finding applications that matter to the mainstream users, where there are billions of people and that create value for them based on cryptocurrencies, the better we'll be able to support the ecosystem and move the technology along. So I want to discuss a proposal for how we might do that at Hub. And I want to start by just relaying a simple story of these basket makers in Kenya who have a basket making operation, and they make very good baskets. But their problem is that obviously they can make lots of baskets, more than enough baskets for the people in their village and surrounding areas. But for them to really gain economic value, they need to access more and more of the market. And how do they distinguish themselves also relative to other people who are providing baskets in the world? And so what we say is that reputation and trustworthiness is the reason that people can find new economic opportunities on the internet. So let's say these basket makers are able to generate a good reputation online. They can not only make more baskets, but they can prosper from delivering their baskets and their products around the world and compete successfully with all of the other basket makers around the world. So what Hub is really trying to bring more trustworthiness to the internet. So before the internet, each of us could only meet a small number of people. And there have been anthropologists who have said that at any given time we can only make contact and have deep relationships with maybe at most 150 people. And what the internet has done has allowed each of us to be able to interact with literally anyone else on the internet. And in so doing, we often come into contact with many, many people who we meet for the first time. And there's a need to establish trust between us and the other person. And by having that trust, we're able to get into deep business relationships, to engage in transactions, and to otherwise have meaningful transactions. And so what Hub is really meant for are really some very widespread use cases for all the things that we do on the internet today, from social networks to sharing economy use cases to online marketplaces, even some fintech scenarios. I just want to talk about the core idea behind Hub. The idea is around this concept of a trust stake, which is when participants are interacting, they put down what we call a stake. It's akin to a bond that you would put down and say, I'm going to be engaging in a trustworthy way. And if all the participants interact well and the interaction or the transaction goes off well, then all the users get rewarded with a token. If things don't go well, there is an arbitrator that can come in that is a trusted member of the community that can decide who is right and who is not. But in either way, there is an outcome that is incentivized towards trustworthy interactions. And that's the public chain protocol that we're building for Hub. So this is a very quick summary of how we can use the blockchain technology to enforce trust. So these interactions can be mapped to smart contracts. Trust stakes are mapped to token incentives. And we record the outcomes of those transactions. And that really is the basis for reputation data and reputation history that leads to further trust between people in the future. And so with this, we could build, let's say, a better professional network. So imagine a decentralized job hub that is a new marketplace where the information that exists about people can be verified on the blockchain. And to the extent that the economic incentives around this marketplace can be restructured so that the incentives goes to the candidates and to the recruiters every time they use the network. So this is our idea behind the Hub Trust Protocol. We call it the second-party trust because it's the way to understand the trustworthiness of the person on the other side that you want to interact with. And this is in contrast to the third-party trust, which blockchain already enforces today through the satisfaction of conditions on the blockchain itself. So please check out our project, and we're working to create a more trustworthy internet that really is more relevant to mainstream users and hopefully brings more users finally into the blockchain world. Thank you.